Let's talk about cognitive foundations. I use cognitive foundations a lot in my lectures, in my books. I meant cognitive foundations is a holistic cognitive capabilities children use and human beings use and related to their learning and their memories and all together. So we have a cognitive functions, and then we have a cognitive processing, and then we have a cognitive developmental domains. So we say cognitive domains or developmental milestones. So cognitive domains and developmental milestones are cognitive, language, social, emotional, motor functions. So when we go to CDC website, it has a very nice, flow chart, and then there are functions, it's cognitive functions and social and emotional and language and motor. So 2 months babies and 4 months babies, 6 months babies. So they have those, developmental charts. That is a developmental growth. So certain, by 2 months, how far child shows cognitive development, and then social development, emotional development, motor development, language development. So those are, cognitive domains. We have 5 categories. 5 categories we check for the children's development. That is pretty much all human functions. And then that's the result of all those disability areas when we say, when they don't make those, well-balanced interdependent development among these 5 areas. So cognitive, there are cognitive. That cognitive is more like executive functioning of a whole growth and well-balanced, interdependent, reciprocal, these 5 domain areas developing. That is, cognitive. And then language development and the social emotional. So, language related disabilities like intellectual disabilities pretty much, linguistically very behind. And then cognitive impairment, cognitive deficit is intellectual disabilities and other disabilities. And then all these 5 domain areas are, autism. ASD is pretty much show most of these 5 areas, somehow weaknesses, somehow very, spiritual, more severe than other areas, but pretty much all these, cross developmental domains, and they show those difficulties. And cognitive function is like a sensation, attention, and perception, and, categorization, assimilation, accommodation, and those are part of processing. However, those are, cognitive functions. And then cognitive pathways and cognitive processing is pretty much humans learning related. So sensory inputs, so all, information coming from outside is a sensory input, a perceptual input, right? So it's more like a factual ones. And those sensory input comes in, and then our, those sensory organs receive those informations, and then our brain process those information. So we say it's mental processing, or we say just processing, we say information processing. And then those processed information is pretty much comprehension, right? Comprehended information goes to long-term memory storages. That's a, knowledge structure or cognitive structure, we name it. And then some of them just need, it's go out and as an output actions and output behaviors. So, when somebody calls and then we respond through answers, or we just physically go and show up to that person. Did you call me, like that? And then, we read and then our reading goes to process and then some of the information, important one, especially when we study for the test, it goes to, short-term memory or long-term memory and stay with, our knowledge structures. And then some of them is that we speak about it, we write about it, we draw about it, right? So those are the behaviors. So it's the output behaviors of our process knowledge comes out. So these are the cognitive pathways, cognitive processing. So what is the relation? These are all together, all well balanced, and then we just process together. So without cognitive functions, without attention, there is no cognitive processing happens, cognitive pathways. So attention is mental energy. It's just ongoing. You have to provide, and you're conscious. When you're unconscious or when you're just consciousness died and sleepy and drowsy, and then pretty much there is no learning takes place, or weak learning takes place. So that attention is a cognitive function, right? And then sensation is a sensory input itself. It does not, you don't receive those sensory inputs. So let's say you're under sensitivity, you have under sensory arousal, and then with weak attention, and then that's what children with autism shows. So when sensory inputs coming in, there are no response or weak response. We call that what autism means, because you stay in your own inner world, so stay your own self, and then that's what we say, it's a self-engagement, self-absorption, and those kind of terms that we say. These are under sensitivity. And then sensory based motor functions, that is a part of cognitive function as well. Because you can walk, or physically you are fine. However, you are not, you have a sensory based motor issues, and then your sense is not there acute enough, and then you can fall, and then you have when you walk, there are some holes and potholes, or not potholes, I forgot what we call that, but those dirt road, and then your feet, bottom, your feet does not sense, do not have those, weak senses, and then pretty much you can just easily tip and just fall, or just, those kind of one, and when you run, and then you're just two legs are not really balanced and well cooperate each other, and then you can run fast. However, if your sense is dull, then so that's a dyspraxia, and then postural control, your body balance, and then body part awareness, and then body part functions. So when children have those deficits, and then it's a motor plannings, and it's people believe that is a part of their attention matters. It's not attention matters, pretty much is sensory based motor issues. So again, these cognitive functions are pretty much each mental functions we have, like attention and sensitivity, those attention functions, and then cognitive milestones, and then cognitive domains, those are the each 5 category areas there. And then sensory processing is a human learning, so sensory is inputs and outputs. And then we have there one more, it's a memory functions. We have different memories. We have a sensory memory, we have a working memory, we have a long-term memory. So each memory is related to cognitive processing, cognitive pathways. So sensory memory is a sensory input coming in, and then it stays about 2 to 3 seconds. So when this sensory inputs do not go to arrive meant for mental processing, pretty much this sensory information is gone to just like 1 to 2 seconds. It's a very short seconds. And then working memory is how do we call that? It's a very short-term memory, right? So working memory is pretty much mental processing wide. You have a mental memory. So it's a working memory is not really like, long-term memory, knowledge structure memory you can remember. So when you heard your name calling, or when you hear, you're, here in this room, and then you heard somebody, talking outside. It looks like somebody visitors there, and then my husband or my child, talked, and then my working memory, I heard those, talking, right? If I'm too much focused on what I'm doing, and then pretty much it's a sensory memory, just like I heard, but it's gone because I didn't respond, it's not processing. However, if I start, who's there? And that's my husband, but that voice is, I don't know, somebody knocked the door, or just why that person comes. And that is I'm processing with that unfamiliar voice, right? That's a working memory. So it's not gonna stay, I'm not gonna remember, that voice, right? Because I'm not attentive there, and then I'm not working with, talking with that person, and then I just remember that person is I know and not know, and all those, complicated processing is not there. So those are working memories while we are working on processing, mental processing, cognitive processing, information processing. And we have to have those, information, so receive the information while we are processing. That's a working memory. Okay. And then long-term memory is those processed information moves to the long-term memory storage we used. And that long-term memory storage is a knowledge structure, but in cognitive psychology calls it cognitive structure. So pretty much all we have cognitive structures, and then we have a lot of information, countless amount of information. So we have from newborn baby time to, our age. So we are 27 years old, and then you have 27 years information knowledge in your brain, and then I'm almost like a 60, a few years ahead, and then I have those long 50 something years my life learning, and just just life learning, study and schools and all those very complicated information in my cognitive structure. So that's a knowledge structure. Each word is a knowledge structure, and then a little bit professional word is cognitive structure. So these are the ones all related to our children's learning. So these are cognitive foundation, and this cognitive foundation is very definite foundation for learning. If children do not have this cognitive foundation, for 5 years, in the beginning of 5 years of their life, at least they should have a solid sensory pathways, and then somehow perceptual processing, perceptual pathways. So pretty much those sensory levels, all those items, visual items names, and then some, auditory, basic auditory information. So it's like a sensory discrimination, auditory discrimination, and then you see, and then perceptual part is more like a little bit more details, and then functions of object. And so those are basic level, not that conceptual level yet, not the abstract level yet, but however, their cognitive function and cognitive foundations should be ready for, factual, physical information, so they could receive, and then they could process when they learn. Okay, so that is the basic level of cognitive foundations. And then each part has a much more complicated and comprehensive content, and then I'm going to cover one by one. This is all interpretation, insights based on the educational perspectives. It's not psychology. So some of psychology levels, they may say, that's not really like it's not. I just talk about this one for our children's school education related functions. Okay.